Good morning, or good evening, depending on when you're going to be listening to this PowerPoint and watching this PowerPoint. This is Sister Carol Crabo. I am a member of the Congregation of St. Joseph, and I minister from the LaGrange Center of our congregation. From now on, when I talk about congregation, I'm going to talk about our congregation that was founded in Le Puy, France in 1650. So, hello to my colleagues in our wonderful congregation. If you would take a look at these slides, you'll see that sponsorship is an essential part of talking about board participation. In our early history, all the way up until refoundations that happened to us in the 1960s and 70s, sponsorship was essentially meaning that our religious communities founded, staffed, and paid all of the expenses for a sponsored ministry. And now we're going to look at how, from our very roots, we have built on our collaboration with lay, men and women, people in other religious congregations, and have now branded sponsorship in a brand new way. Essentially, sponsorship is a relationship, as you can see, between a religious congregation, our congregation, and a specific ministry. Those of us that are board members and you that might become board members are also called trustees, and we carry in live action the relationship in particular, vibrant, evolving, and mutual ways. And so when one of us says that we will be a board member for a sponsored ministry, these are the qualities that we will bring to our participation on the board. So what does sponsorship mean? These are some descriptions that might help us to understand that sponsorship is a lot more than going to a board meeting. From our tradition, from our Catholic Christian tradition, sponsorship derives from, as we can see in the slide, the mission of the church, the mission that carries out the role of Jesus. In John 15, Jesus said to his disciples, "Love one another as I have loved you." And we know from John 17 that carries the words, the charism, and then finally the mission of our congregation. We're called to unity, and the results of unity, of course, is unifying love. And so when we agree to be on a board of a sponsored ministry, in its very root, we're saying that we are called to love one another as Jesus has loved us. In order to carry on Jesus' mission, a group was selected by Jesus to work with him, to be neighbor to neighbor, and neighbor then to God, to love one another as I have loved you. So Jesus selected first the group of the 12, first the disciples. The apostles and disciples chose the deacons, and the deacons then grew into, and I'm not talking about deacon the way we know deacon now, but I'm talking about this group that the early Christian community empowered and recognized with the call of diaconia, the call of service. They were so imbued with the dual responsibility of Jesus' invitation to pray and to work that they began to see that it was necessary to include and to bring into being men and women who would continue the Christian message of living and working that all may be one. And so when we talk about those that are the first board members or trustees, we include deacons, deaconesses, the women that we know by name who were called by Paul deacon, Lydia and Priscilla, and I could go on and on and on, but this isn't a church history lesson. This is a reflection on sponsorship and board membership. So we're making a giant historical leap. And by the time we get into the 16th century, the century of the movement from strictly contemplative religious life to the creation of apostolic life, congregations like the Jesuits and like ours arose to carry on Jesus' mission, specifically to attend to the churches, to the people's apostolic ministries. And as we know, especially in preaching, educating, healthcare, social services, assistance to the poor, the underserved, and the vulnerable. We could also have a wonderful segue and go into the history of our congregation, beginning in Le Puy and moving on, to see how we have then carried on the dual love and mission of praying and working that all may be one. That's another presentation. So today, sponsorship has come to be seen as a unique ministry with responsibilities beyond the traditional staffing and management of an institution. It has been broadened, it has been deepened, and it is an opportunity for all sorts of us, men and women, young and old, religious and lay, to participate actively in carrying on the mission of a ministry through board membership and through being a trustee. So in our congregation then, sponsorship is how the congregation continues and extends its mission of inclusive, unifying love that flows from the mission of Jesus, that all may be one. So the mission of a sponsored institution and the mission of our congregation are not different. And it's because of that there's a mutually dynamic relationship between the congregation, in board language called the member, and the board members, who are called the board. Pretty obvious, isn't it? Another qualification is that sponsorship acknowledges a formal recognition of the ministry. It means that this ministry is more than the dream of an individual. It matches the mission because the ministry can use our name and act on our behalf and can in some ways even expect financial support. So the resources that the congregation has, in many instances, are used for the ministry, and it's the responsibility of board members to exercise responsible stewardship for the common good, not only for the ministry, but for the ministers and for the congregation. So what would be some criteria of a sponsored ministry? I had an opportunity to look at some of the roles and descriptions of sponsored ministries across our congregations in the United States. And it seems to me that these are consistent criteria for a sponsored ministry. And then in an indirect way, this would be kind of a discernment on whether or not you want to have the desire and have the ability to be a board member for one of our sponsored ministries. And so for a ministry to be sponsored by our congregation, generally speaking, this ministry articulates clearly and visibly expresses the CSSJ mission and key elements of your congregation's goals in concrete ways. And we could certainly take that apart. But underneath it all, this ministry brings about unity. It brings about, in whatever area the ministry operates, it brings about wholeness and holiness to all the people to whom and with whom they and you minister. A second criteria is that a sponsored ministry responds to an identified need consistent with the mission of the congregation. And we know that we weren't founded for any one specific ministry, but we were founded to do whatever women are called to do. Certainly from 1650 to now, the ability and the opportunity for women has greatly, greatly expanded. So too then has the diversity of our ministries. From simply formal education, formal health care, formal social service, we now have sponsored ministries that are on the cutting edge of society. And this is where many of us are active in boards for new and very necessary cutting-edge places that aren't necessarily pretty or aren't necessarily easy. Not that in the past that they were. Another criteria is that our sponsored ministries model organizational integrity, unfailing respect for the sacredness of all creation, for the dignity of all persons, and a commitment to excellence. This flows from our early desire to be called to the more, doesn't it? And finally, a sponsored ministry retains a purpose beyond the initiative of a particular individual. A sponsored ministry is a broad cup of holding on to that which is inherently present in the desire and the purpose of our congregation as a whole. It could begin with an individual dream. In fact, most do, don't they? But then because it's so authentic to the personal needs and the human needs of people, it has a life beyond the individual. And this is the very reason that we say we really want, the congregation, want to sponsor this beyond the life and talents of the founding person or the founding group. So why are we talking about sponsorship? Let's just take a minute now and formulate the connection between sponsorship and board membership. I certainly started to talk about that, but let's just look at it from very, very distinct and clear formulations. When you look at this from the view of the secular world, the civil world, civil corporation, the way sponsorship would be formulated is this: the connection between the ecclesial world of a religious congregation and the civil world of a government. Laws are described by calling a sponsored ministry a 501c3 organization. It is in this relationship, that is between civil and religious law, civil and canon law, that a board member exercises her or his responsibilities. So what is a 501c3 organization? The U.S. Internal Revenue Services defines a 501c3 as an organization or a corporation that is organized and operates exclusively for charitable, educational, or religious purposes. The Internal Revenue Service has such clear definitions that, for example, in a hospital, the amount of service that is given to those who, quotes, are green card people or people who do not have incomes is based on the percentage of the gross income of the particular hospital. And so you as a board member, when we see some of the particular responsibilities, have to make sure that the organization for which you're a board member operates so clearly that the charitable, educational, or religious purposes is the primary purpose of the ministry for which you're on the board. This is a very delicate and a very necessary communication and responsibility. So this would be the general definition of what an individual on a board of trustees is charged with. And the parentheses is very significant. An individual board member has no authority when he or she is speaking or doing something separate from the board as a whole. An individual on a board of trustees has no authority independent of board work. So an individual on a board of trustees is charged with overseeing the totality of an organization so it is able to achieve its objectives and its purposes. For example, if you're on a school board, a board of trustees for one of our sponsored academies, colleges, elementary schools, you would have no authority as a board member to go speak with the executive director of the ministry or the principal or the president unless you were authorized by the board of trustees as a whole to speak. Being on a board gives you no authority. Being on a board authorized to speak for the board gives you authority. This could be a little sensitive sometimes, as you can see. So a trustee is legally responsible, because boards that are duly erected are 501c3s. So a trustee or a board member is legally responsible for making decisions in the best interest of the organization and of ensuring its compliance with the mission, key, and all legal, canonical, and regulatory requirements. When boards are doing their legal responsibility, their canonical responsibility, and any other regulatory requirements, even into choosing people for boards, hiring, or letting the authorities in a specific ministry go, all of this is done in the light of our mission, that all may be one. That's key. The mission of the ministry and the mission of the congregation flow with and from each other. So trustees, this is just a little aside, trustees, that is board members, need to be especially mindful of the fiduciary duty to the specific ministry when they sit on the boards. Fiduciary is that whole area of the financial area, the financial responsibility of a ministry. And the financial responsibility, we live in a real world. We live in a world of theologically incarnation. We are whole. We have bodies. And there's an adage that comes out of board work in the hospital situation. It's a common little statement that says, no money, no mission. So if there is not money to continue the effective operation of a ministry, it is up to the board members or the trustees to work with the administration of the specific ministry to make sure that fiduciary responsibility is clear and helpful and necessary. So in summary, let's put this together. Traditionally made up of lay and religious, a board of trustees, the board of trustees of a specific ministry, is delegated by the corporate member. In our congregation, it would be the president, the general superior, whatever you call, and the general council to exercise responsibility for the general governance of each organization. This governance is also subject to state laws, articles of incorporation, and the ministry's own bylaws. This is, generally speaking, what a board of trustee member says she will do when she accepts a role on a board. So what then are the key responsibilities of a board? We've talked about the general fiduciary responsibility. We've talked just this general discussion that you just had of overseeing the totality of an organization so it's able to achieve its objectives and purpose. But what does that look like from the viewpoint of our mission and ministry? The key responsibilities then of a board that supervises, that supports a sponsored ministry of the congregation, shapes and clarifies the mission of the organization, maintains the organization's faithfulness to the mission and values of itself and of the congregation of St. Joseph. The board sets organizational direction, including effective planning. assures that the ministry has the necessary resources, both financial and human, to live out its mission and its responsibilities. The board provides oversight of the assets, programs, and services. Generally, the board supports and evaluates the executive director or the president. The board builds and maintains a competent board for itself, continually striving to improve board performance and to make sure that there is a succession of competent board members when one board member leaves the board and is replaced by another. The board also ensures legal and ethical integrity within the ministry. So if that's the responsibility of the board as a whole, what is the responsibility of effective board members? Remember, board members work as a whole. So each member, as a part of the board, has a knowledge of and a commitment to the CSSJ mission and the mission of the ministry, and has an ability, intent to lead out of the mission. A board member has a clear understanding of the board's responsibility for the organization's governance. A board member regularly attends all board and committee meetings. A board member actively and appropriately participates in the board's deliberations. I might say that one of the challenges of a board member is to actively and appropriately participate. If you're the kind of person who really does not contribute in a group, that would be a personal discernment for you on whether or not you would take the invitation to be on a board. It isn't helpful to have board members not actively participate. This is a danger because sometimes boards want to invite people because they have, quotes, lots of money. Now, that's not our issue. But we might have other reasons that people invite us to be on a board. Actually, an acceptance to join a board is really determined on your discernment on how you can actively and appropriately participate. Board members review the agenda, read the reports, and all supporting materials prior to the meetings. Board members serve on board committees like finance committees, personnel committees, mission effectiveness, and if there are special assignments, board members are open to serving on these if they match the specific board member's talent, time, and sometimes treasure. Board members also stay informed about the organization's mission, services, policies, programs. They keep up to date on developments in the organization's field. This is critical. If you're on a hospital board, it just makes all the sense in the world that the board members are up to date on the latest structure and research in healthcare. The same is true in education. The same is true of social service. The same is true of penal institutions. The same is true of organizations that work in the area of advocacy. Board members, because they have accepted the responsibility to be on a board, keep up to date on the developments in the organization's field. Board members make a commitment to follow conflict of interest and confidentiality policies. They follow and support the decisions of the board, not undermining decisions with which they may not agree. This flows with the whole idea that a board member does not have authority or an opinion independent of decisions and actions of the board. So in summary, a board member is an ambassador for the organization to which she is a member of the board. Board members can see this as an active ministry. It is truly a gift to the congregation's mission when those of us who are called and invited and have the qualifications to be on the board of a sponsored ministry. Acknowledge and accept this, because in a very, very specific way, sponsored ministries are the public face of how our mission and our ministry is lived in the world. One of the things that can help you even learn more is to Google Boards of Trustees of not-for-profits. Google is full of articles and insights in not-for-profit boards. Another suggestion that I would make is that in the field of organizational development, there's a movement that's rather subtle but is rather significant when it comes to the idea of planning. Because technology is so vibrant and is helping us communicate so well, and because the life of the world is evolving so quickly, there is sort of a subtle movement from doing strategic planning to moving toward groups doing strategic thinking together. I would encourage you to read an article. It's called Strategic Thinking Defined. Just Google that. The name again is Strategic Thinking Defined, and it's by Greg Githens, Githens. It will help you to think about what's happening in boards across the United States as planning evolves from strategic planning to strategic thinking. Quick definition. Strategic thinking is defined as the individual's capacity for thinking conceptually, imaginatively, systematically, and opportunistically with regard to the attainment of the purpose of an organization. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you quickly. I hope that your ending time with this and with our wonderful leadership as leaven continues to grow. Amen.